Good evening. As many of you know me, my name is Paul Bahowski, and I will be your moderator pro tem for tonight's meeting. As most of you know, our longtime moderator, Michael Hardy, passed away about 3 months ago. And it is an honor to stand here in for Mike tonight. Please stand if you are able and join me in a moment of silence for Michael. Thank you. Please remain standing as we face our American flag and pledge the allegiance. I pledge the allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all. It has been more than 20 years since I moderated a public meeting, and I would ask your indulgence and patience as we work our way through tonight's meeting. I have no doubt that you will kindly and gently call any errors to my attention. You should note that I will not recognize or call on anyone standing behind the rail or the head of the aisles, nor will we count your vote. Please join us and have a seat. Now would also be a very good time for everyone to shut off their cell phones and pagers, please. The meeting will be conducted according to Robert's Rules of Order, except as modified by state statute. You can't change state law, but you can choose to modify Robert's Rules with a 2/3 majority vote. General Roberts had pages of rules for decorum during debate. I hope that it will not be necessary to remind you to conduct yourself in a civil and polite manner. As Mike always said, we arrived as neighbors and friends, and we will leave as such. Please stand if possible and state your name when recognized. You'll have to forgive me because I will not know everyone in the auditorium tonight, but I'll do my best. We have runners with microphones, so please wait until one of them reaches you before you begin to speak. Please address all comments and questions to me as the moderator, and I will either answer or redirect them to somebody who can respond. Only registered voters may speak unless by leave of the assembly, which requires a 2/3 vote if there is no objection. Unless there is an objection, I will assume there is a leave for the assembly for village officials who may not be resident voters to address the assembly for purpose of explanation during this meeting. Those of you who are eligible to vote were given a voter's card. The purpose of those is to allow us to identify you as a voter who has passed through the checklist. On a division, please hold your card up so that everyone is comfortable that only voters are voting. On a paper ballot, the clerks will mark your card as you pass through the line so as to assure that folks only vote once. Those articles requiring an Australian ballot vote tomorrow will be taken up for discussion only, and no action other than discussion can be taken on them at this meeting. I will strive to make any rulings that I'm called upon to make as impartially and correct as I can. Any ruling of the moderator can be challenged immediately after the ruling. I'll explain my ruling, and if you are not satisfied, all it takes is a request to challenge the ruling and put it to a vote of the assembly. Debate on the motion to appeal the ruling of the chair is generally in order. It is my job to assist you in accomplishing the business of this meeting. Please raise your hand and ask questions. If you think something is happening that is incorrect or you don't understand it, again, please raise your hand. If you want to do something and don't know how to do it, again, that will be my job to help you get whatever you would like done. You must be recognized by the moderator to address the assembly. I will try to recognize all those who wish to speak in an orderly fashion, getting around to all those who wish to speak but haven't yet had the opportunity. Before returning to those who have already spoken, a person may only speak twice to an issue and is limited to 10 minutes total. I hope you can be brief and not feel you need to use up all your time or replow the ground that you or someone else has already gone over. A motion must be made, seconded, and restated by the moderator before debate on the motion can begin. In some instances, only 2 amendments will be allowed on the floor at any one time. That is 1 amendment on the main motion and 1 amendment to the amendment where appropriate. It requires a motion, a second, and 2/3 vote to cut off the debate and call the question. You have to be recognized to make the motion. You can't shout it out because you are tired of the debate. The motion to close debate is non-debatable. By state statute, once voters have acted on a question and taken up the next item of business, they cannot reconsider the action at the same meeting. Voting will be by voice vote unless the chair is in doubt, in which case there will be a division. Also, any voter may call for a division as long as we have not started the next item of business. Any voter may move to vote by paper ballot during the debate or before we have moved on to the next order of business, in which case the vote will be by ballot. If the call for a ballot is sustained by at least 6 other members. Action under other business cannot require expenditure of funds, nor can it be binding upon the village. Any action under other business is advisory only. At this point, I would like to introduce the people sitting at the front table, starting with Carrie Bennett, the village clerk, Shane O'Keefe, our village manager, Miles Mickles, village president, Jim McAuliffe, village trustee, Stephen Golick, village trustee, Deb Wright, village trustee, and Steve Adams, village trustee. At this time, I would like to introduce Miles Mickles for a couple of presentations.
We'll make this work. All right. Thank you, Paul. First of all, I would like to just read the dedication to this year's annual report. The Bellows Falls Village Corporation 2016-2017 Annual Report is hereby dedicated to recently retired Water Department Chief Operator Raymond Perry. Ray has dedicated a numerous amount of time to the Bellows Falls Village and to the town of Rockingham. He started his career with the municipality as a part-time employee in November 1979 in the Rockingham Highway Department, advancing to full-time status in July 1982, and was promoted to road foreman in February 1985. Ray then moved to the Bellows Falls Village Water Department in November 1993 as an operator, then advanced to be assistant chief in November 95, and finally held the position of chief operator since November of 2006. Ray retired from the chief operator's position in December 2017 after 38 years of combined service to the Bellows Falls Village and the town of Rockingham. Ray was the town of Rockingham's tree warden from March 2008 until October 2017 and has held the exalted position of Inspector of Lumber, Shingles, and Wood, a statutory appointment since March 2007, and Ray has volunteered his time as a member of the Rockingham Tree Committee for a number of years. In the dead of winter, you could find Ray helping to flood the skating rink at the village playground, checking the swimming pool in the summer and the weekends, and volunteering as a ski patrol at the village ski tow. He has also been a longtime parade marshal for the annual Bellows Falls High School Alumni Parade. Ray was born in Bellows Falls on September 6, 1947, and graduated from Bellows Falls High School in 1970. He lives with his wife, Joanne, in Bellows Falls. He is an avid hunter and is looking forward to dedicating more time to this sport. Thank you, Ray, for your continued dedication to and love of Bellows Falls. We salute you. Now, before I sit down, I have one other notice. I'd like to offer the Certificate of Appreciation from the Bellows Falls Village Corporation to Steve Adams in recognition of service as Bellows Falls Village Trustee 2016-2018. What a long, strange trip it's been.
And I also have one presentation, which is a certificate of appreciation from the Bellows Falls Village Corporation to Miles Mickles in recognition of service as Bellows Falls Village President from 2016 to 2018. Thank you very much. Send that down. Okay. The warning for tonight and tomorrow has an introductory paragraph which reads as follows. Bellows Falls Village Annual Meeting, May 14 and 15, 2018. The legal voters of Bellows Falls Village Corporation are hereby notified and warned to meet at the Bellows Falls Opera House in the Rockingham Town Hall located at 7 Square in the Village on Monday, May 14th, 2018 at 7 p.m. to act upon all matters which may be voted upon by acclamation and not otherwise to be voted upon by Australian ballot, and then adjourn to the Masonic Temple, 61 Westminster Street in said village at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, May 15th, 2018, to vote by Australian ballot on Article 1. The polls will be open from 9 a.m. and will close at 7 p.m. Article 1, to elect village officers as required by law. This is by Australian ballot tomorrow at the Masonic Temple. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we will move on to Article 2, to receive and act upon the reports of the village officers for the past year. Deb.
I move to accept the reports of the village officers for the past year as printed.
Seconded. We have a motion that has been made and seconded to accept the reports of the village officers for the past year as printed. Is there any discussion? Mr. McPhee.
Thank you. Douglas McPhee. Page 29, this is a matter of information for the trustees. I had a conversation with Chief Lake about overtime. His explanation to me was very good. I understand it, but I would like the trustees to keep an eye on this item throughout the year, if possible. May I continue? I have a couple of more, Mike. Thank you. Turn to page 30, please. Police Department insurance. Workman's compensation, a huge increase. In fact, without that, the police budget wouldn't have increased that much. Over $21,000. Do we have a record that requires that? And if so, then we ought to do something about that. And my second part of that question is, we are currently insured with a company or a group we've been with a long time. Do we have any other options for insurance that could be less money?
And Doug, if we could, what I'd like to do is if we can save this for Article 4 under the budget for that
Okay.
explanation, please.
Fine. Then one more, if I might.
Yes.
Delinquency, especially water, sewer. I'm just wondering, I realize that you're collecting interest and penalties, but I want to know, do we often have people who don't pay go into bankruptcy, foreclosures, and we are stuck holding the bag? We have one woman in here that owes us a small fortune, $6,700. I don't know, that's a lot of water to me, or sewer. I'm wondering if I could get the answer to, do we lose funds here, or do we end up collecting most of them? And thank you.
Anybody on the board like to answer that, or Shane?
Thank you. We actually have just gone through shut-offs this last week, and actually did shut off a few, but there are quite a few people who did pay up from these dollar amounts listed. As you note, it is as of April 17th. Since that time, quite a few people have come in and paid up. We do have some folks who have bills that are quite high. I don't know the status of those at this very moment, but as you said, there are some folks who are in bankruptcy, and in those cases, we really can't touch them. But we are working on trying to get it down.
And just do a quick follow-up. Can we move quicker than to do a shut-off? Therefore, we don't have a higher amount on the bankruptcies. I'll ask it again. Can we move quicker on the shut-offs, or we just, state law restricts us, so we don't have people who go bankrupt owing us $6,000, $7,000 worth of money? Thank you.
The answer is yes. We can do the best we can, but there are some statutory steps that we are required to take, and there's a certain amount of delinquency that has to transpire before we can pull the trigger on that. But once they do get those door knockers on their properties, we do get pay up pretty quickly in a lot of them.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Mitchell. Coming down right here.
James Mitchell. I'd like to ask a question, seeing as Doug brought up water and sewer. The major increase that we had, is this time to ask this question?
Yep.
The major increase that we had of 25%, as I understand it, we have a $1,800,000 bond that we're going to be paying on for the next 2 years, and that's why we have the 25% increase. Once that bond is paid off, are the water rates going to go back down, or are they going to stay up there forever?
That $1.8 million bond has not even, we've not even pulled the trigger on that one yet. The 25% has to do not only with that in the future, trying to pay, increase rates to deal with that, but we just have incurred a $6.7 million bond, part of the upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant, which was $9.8 million, $3 million of that being grant. So that bond just hit this year, half of which was due in March, but on an annualized basis, it's $444,000, I believe, each year. So in order to pay, that's the nut each year we have to pay on that one bond. That $1.8 million, that will, that was the bond authority. The actual borrowing that's going to happen this year is just shy of $1 million, because we get $441,000 in grant funds. These are necessary improvements to the water lines. It's never cheaper than doing it now. And with the incentivized financing that we've received from the USDA Rural Development, again, coming in with over $441,000 of grant money, it's a good financial situation for us to be in, insofar as the need for infrastructure improvements. It's imperative that we can keep up and make the improvements to the wastewater treatment and water treatment facilities.
Now, as I had discussed,
These payments, Jim, are over 20 years, not 2 years.
Yeah.
20 years.
okay, that answers that question. Thank you.
Mrs. Ladd.
That's the name of a ownership corporation, and that is actually scheduled to be paid up this week. In that that was property that was purchased at tax sale back in September of 2016. Finally came available for the individual to purchase it, and there was some controversy as to whether or not they actually had to pay those past due utility bills. And in fact, the trustees just voted on that at their last meeting to deny the request for a waiver of those fees. I've been in contact with the individual who owns the company, and he'll be paying this Friday. The principal of the company, I also know, is affiliated with Westmoreland Auto, but there's no location called Hurricane Acres. That's the name of the entity.
Any other questions? Any other further discussion? Yes.
My name is Ronald Kern. I live on School Street. I've been there for 18 years. Speak up? Okay, thank you. The increases in sewer, water and sewer, I think is indicative of increases in taxes and all in both the town and village, and it has been hurting us from several different areas. And I'm going to speak a little later about my my thoughts and a few things that I want to offer this congregation. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor to receive and act upon the reports of the village officers for the past year. Motion has been made, it has been seconded. Are we ready for the question? If so, all in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed would say no. The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it, and we have passed Article 2. We will move on to Article 3 to see if the voters of Bellows Falls Corporation will vote to authorize its treasurer, with the approval of the trustees, to borrow money from time to time in anticipation of tax collection or payment of money due the village from the state of Vermont or the federal government. Steve?
I move that the voters of Bellows Falls Village Corporation authorize its treasurer, with the approval of the trustees, to borrow money from time to time in anticipation of tax collection or payment of money due the village from the state of Vermont or the federal government.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to see if the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation will vote to authorize its treasurer, with the approval of the trustees, to borrow money from time to time in anticipation of tax collection or payment of money due the village from the state of Vermont or the federal government. Is there any discussion? This is really just a housekeeping motion. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, does everyone have the motion in mind? If so, all those that are in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed would say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And we move on to Article 4. Article 4, shall the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate money to pay the indebtedness of the village and to pay all other general and regular expenses of the village beginning July 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2019 in the amount of $1,674,220 in expenditures, of which $1,629,950 will be raised by taxes. Miles?
I move that the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate money to pay the indebtedness of the village and pay all other general and regular expenses of the village beginning July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2019 in the amount of $1,674,220 in expenditures, of which $1,629,950 will be raised by taxes.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
A motion has been made and seconded that the voters of Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate money to pay the indebtedness of the village and pay all other general and regular expenses of the village beginning July 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2019 in the amount of $1,674,220 in expenditures, of which $1,629,950 will be raised by taxes. Is there any discussion? And I guess I'll start and see if Miles has any presentation or...
Yes. Right. The thing to keep in mind is that this year's budget, we kept under the $1.7 million line as established at the reconsideration of the budget last year. And this is primarily a public services budget. This is fire and police. And I believe that I know that Chief Lake and Chief McGinnis are satisfied with how this budget has turned out.
Any other comments? Any other input? I'll come back to you, Shane.
Now's my time on workman's comp, page 30, police workman's comp, up over 21,000, 40-something%, way higher over the 2017 actual. And I don't know, do we have any control of this? Can we shop around? We've been with this current insurer since a very, very long time, and I know personally that I just switched auto insurance because all of a sudden my insurer had raising, and I found a sizable savings by doing that. But I don't know that we can, but to me this is an outrageous increase. The drug companies don't even do that, but thank you.
Shane.
Workers' comp is based upon, we get an experience modification based upon injuries and illnesses related to work. We saw in just about every department, town and village, some increases. Some we saw it go down a little bit. But it is experience-based, it's pool-based, and we are working on different, on a consistent basis, working on employee safety to try to do what we can do to avoid accidents and whatnot, but sometimes they are unavoidable, and it's by virtue of that that some of these rates are very high, and they're a rolling average. It's a 5-year average, so even if it's very difficult, in fact, to change insurers because they look back several years. So that's how it's taken. That's how it's calculated each time.
Please.
I don't think I need the microphone. I do, okay. I must be getting old when I need a microphone. When you said pool-based, is that pool-based based on our department or pool-based on the entire department or both? Entire departments throughout their insured?
You have different categories for, it depends on what you're actually doing for employment. It's for each different type, an office worker has one rating, a police officer has a different, a highway worker has a different rating, and that's based upon not only our own experience, but the pool, my understanding is throughout the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and their whole package of insured.
Any other comments, discussions? Mr. Mitchell? Just wait for the mic, please. Jim, just before you start, Shane just pointed out to me that there is a explanation of the budget that as you walked in it's a handout that basically explains pretty much changes in the budget.
Has pie charts and synopsises and things like that.
Jim?
Okay, for the purpose of clarification, you indicated that both chiefs, the fire chief and the police chief, signed off on this budget and they're quite satisfied with it. I would like to know, what is the total fire department budget now that it's been reorganized, and what is the total police department budget right now?
Are you talking about the year-to-date right now, or the
What
proposal for
is go-
FY19?
For FY19, the budget that we're working on right now, or we're going to vote on.
Sure, in the handout.
I can't see, I'm blind, so.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, in just the fire department, the total budget for fire department, existing fiscal year, FY18, is $409,980. The proposed budget is $243,370. It's quite a drop. The police department, on the other hand, police department shows a increase from $1,080,280 to $1,158,560.
Okay. Can I follow that up with, that's the increase, does that include the cruiser that they want to buy for $43,000?
No, the cruiser is under capital expenditures. It's a $40,000 number. But again, going back to the point raised by Mr. McPhee, the workers' compensation rate is dramatically higher. I mean, it's going from 40, the year-to-date from last year was 41,000. The budget for the present year is just shy of 50,000. We budgeted $71,000 for workers' comp for next year for the police department.
That's understandable because that's a violent profession that they're in, so I can understand the increase, but there are ways to alleviate that also. We'll just continue on now. Thank you very much.
Yes. Any other questions, comments? Deb?
I believe the heart of Mr. McPhee's question was whether or not we'd shopped around for our insurance. And in past years, those questions have come up. Whether those figures were ever attained, I'm not aware. But I do not believe in this past couple of years we have shopped our insurance at all. So there is a possibility, as with everyone else in the free market, that we might save money, but VLCT provides a lot of additional support for us as well, which is why we typically stick with them. Thanks.
Mr. Hardy?
Dennis Hardy. I'd just like to know that we embarked on a program to give business owners money so that they can sprinkle a building, which I was opposed to because I don't think it's a village concern. It's more of a town community development thing. But anyways, where did that money come from and how much did we spend on that? And do we have any more plans to spend more on it?
The trustees passed a policy this year to to contribute up to $7,000 for anyone in the downtown village core who wish to sprinkler their building. And that $7,000 was specifically for equipment, plumbing, piping, things of that nature, not the not labor or anything like that. We did spend, I'll have to do a little homework, which would just take me a minute, but we did work out with 3 different property owners that specific benefit. And if you give me a moment, I can look it up.
Where'd that money come from, Shane?
It's in the water budget. It was not budgeted, but it's in the water fund, and therefore ultimately is paid for by the users through fees. But if you give me a moment, I can pull that up.
Coming out of the water fund, Denny, I believe.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
How much we got in the water fund?
Sorry, how much is the water fund?
Yeah.
The proposed budget for this next year is total expenditures of $1.25 million.
Yeah, but this money, did it come out of the reserve fund, or did it come out of ratepayers as we pay?
I'm trying to find what budget line it was, but it was not out of a reserve fund. It came out of the operating funds.
Any other questions or comments? Anyone else? Because I see Mr. McPhee's hand again. Anybody else before I go back to Doug?
Can I respond?
Absolutely, if you
I
have
did
that.
find within the budget. We did, one of the budget lines we have is called main line, and in this year's budget, the board allocated $10,000. We spent $22,891. Some of that is under this sprinkler program. Some of it is under other mainline construction. My recollection, it's probably 20, maybe 15,000 total.
Any other questions, comments, before I go back to Mr. McPhee for a second time?
Mr. Monterey, I move that when we vote the question, we vote by Australian ballot.
Are there 6 other members of this? And if there are, please stand. And Jim, obviously, I see your hand, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have more than enough then to vote by paper ballot when the time comes. Any other discussion on Article 4?
May I just point out one thing is that in the budget summaries, what you can see is that the overall expenditures are down 4.4%, which is year over year reduction in the budget of $77,160. The amount to be raised by taxes is down $70,050, and that's 4.1%.
Any other comments, questions?
Hi there, Gaetano Putignano. In this police budget, have you put where are we at with parking enforcement? Is that in there? What is happening with that?
There are no additional fees, expenditures for parking enforcement. One of the things that I was tasked to do by the trustees is to look into volunteer parking enforcement. We're still working on that. We're waiting to hear back from the police union on whether or not that would be considered something that we would need to be bargaining for. And we're still waiting to hear back. We have a deadline of this week. But there are no additional funds set aside for that. We did.
But there's the same as last year's budget for parking enforcement?
There's no specific allocation for parking enforcement from a personnel standpoint. Bear with me 1 second while I look. Yeah. There is some change in parking program. It is increasing from $1,200 to $2,000. And some of that has to do with purchasing of the tickets, the ticket books, and that nature.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we vote on this motion? Mr. Mitchell.
James Mitchell, Bellows Falls. I would like to actually amend this motion to reduce the budget by $243,000. I can speak to the motion and explain my thought process if you so wish. But I'd like to get a second and then open this up for debate.
An amendment to the main motion has taken place that we reduce the overall budget by $243,000. And I'm also assuming that we will reduce the amount of money raised by taxes by the same dollar figure. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it has been seconded, so now the discussion will be on the amendment. Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. McAuliffe, a year ago, when we had many discussions at village trustee meetings, you described the two gorillas in the room, and they were both fire and police. Now, I hate to use those terms, but we've addressed the fire department budget. It went from, and believe me, I have figures in my head, it went from $740,000 plus about $25,000 a year in overtime. It is now down to $200 and some odd thousand. The police department budget is not sustainable. It is absolutely not sustainable. There are ways of reducing that budget by allocating manpower, by switching shifts. There are so many ways. I've talked with police chiefs in a few towns. One town, Fairhaven, their budget is $325,000. They have a working police chief who goes out, who is on patrol, who writes his own press releases. He has a cadre of part-time people. While we, on the other hand, we're unionized. We can't say anything about that, but we can certainly trim that budget. And why do I feel that way? We've had 10 years under this particular chief, and our crime has gone up. Drugs have gone up. He's admitted it. We send the most drugs in than rivaled only by the state police. Well, we don't see the press releases to back any of this up, so we have no way of knowing. We don't have a full-time dispatch. You can't call and get answers. So I'm just saying, it's now time to address the gorilla in the room and to reshuffle and reorganize that police department and make it a much leaner, meaner fighting machine. I do not want to see officers injured. But by the same token, we can't have 3 or 4 on in one shift and then only 1 on the day shift. There's a tremendous disparity in there. There should always be 2 officers on duty at all times. Now, we can either do one of 2 things: totally put the budget out, or look to other alternatives. I've said my piece. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
So,
Miles.
yes, thank you. So, Mr. Mitchell, you would like us to reduce the police department budget with this $243,000. That is the essence of your motion.
Yes.
And you want there to be more officers, or 2 officers on duty at all times, and you want a full-time dispatch. all of that means increases.
You fail to understand what I said. There are times when we have 3 and 4 officers on duty. I sat out there last night talking with one of them. There were 3 officers on. Other times we only have 1 officer on. What I'm saying is you allocate the shifts so that there are 2 on every shift. That's not the situation that we have right now. You have officers working alone during the daytime. Their lives are in jeopardy. As far as dispatch goes, we need to look at other alternatives rather than spending $98,000 to have the Windham County Sheriff's dispatch from Cleardown and Newfane. Okay, there are other alternatives. Nobody has ever looked at those alternatives. It's just like we pass the budget and we sit back and let it be lucky. You know, we're not in the promised land. I'm sorry. And as Jiggs himself said, there are 2 gorillas in the room. Now, we've obviously cut the fire department budget to bare bones, and we have a really good, lean, mean fighting machine. We have 29 volunteers. A couple years ago, we heard how we were going to die if we cut 1 man from that budget. Now, I've been putting up with this for 18 years. Just a few years ago, there was an elderly man who could barely stand right at that podium, and he begged you, please, please, this is cut to stop. We can't afford it. Well, Jiggs, you're the man with the plan. You know what needs to be done. And whoever the new trustees are, I hope they heed my warnings, because this village is doomed if we keep going on raising taxes.
First of all, Jim and I have not discussed any budgets at any time. I want you to be aware of that. Excuse me, please, I'm referring to this. I would, first of all, I would encourage everybody to vote against this amendment. It's irresponsible, in my opinion. The changes that took place in the fire department, I think, have been done very effectively, thanks to the leadership of our manager and certainly to Chief McGinnis and the terrific job he's done. The actual difference in the budget, we took, for some reason in the past, the expenses of the building that houses both fire and police were put in as part of the fire department budget. We've now separated that out. The actual decline in the budget from this last year was $409,000 down to $243,000. And again, I think we did it without compromising the safety of our residents, and we're in very good shape with regards to our fire coverage. With regards to the police, I for one, am comfortable with the issues that we face in this village. Gaetano just mentioned traffic control, but obviously we're thinking of other things that reflect our demographics, as well as the issues with drugs that plague us. And I think that the proposed budget is realistic and appropriate. The reference to the gorilla in the room was just that our budget is basically comprised of those 2 items, and it was not a reflection on trying to kill the gorilla. The issue was and is to come up with a responsible budget, and I think the one that we're proposing here tonight is that one.
Chief Lake.
I'd like to speak on some of Mr. Mitchell's comments. The crimes, the complaints we answer equate to 250 arrests a year. When I came here 10 years ago, we arrested around 125. So we are kind of busy. Comparing Bellows Falls to Fairhaven doesn't even come close. The arrests we have here in the village of Bellows Falls, I spend a lot of time dealing with the heroin problem, opiate issues that we have in the village of Bellows Falls. I will not, under any circumstance, stick my head in the sand and ignore these matters at all or anytime in the future. So long as I'm the police chief, I wouldn't recommend that we do that at all. We need to go after it aggressively and not ignore it. I do everything I can to see to it that I have personnel on staff during our busiest times and not ignore it. Sometimes during the day, things are a little less busier than they are in the evening, but nonetheless, it's very busy around here. Last year, we answered 3,600 calls. 1 square mile, this little tiny village, 3,600 calls. Think about that. We only have a population of what, 3,300 people? We're answering a lot of calls with the staff that we have, and it's still not enough, but we're making do. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Andrew Smith, Bellows Falls. I just would like to encourage my village neighbors to vote no on this amendment that is now on the floor. Since the last year's annual village meeting, I believe there have been 28 village trustee meetings. And I'd like to thank the trustees for, putting up with that intense meeting schedule. Those were the times to get with your trustees and your manager if you had issues with how the village was being run, how the departments were being run, and the budgets. To do it here with this scant number of people at our annual village meeting is just, it's irresponsible, it's a bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Kern. Please address to me.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'd like to offer one thing that is, first of all, disheartening and sobering, but follow up with something that's enlightening. How many of you are familiar with the website msn.com? None of you? I'm surprised. It's one of the most popular websites in the world. In today's msn.com, in the top left corner, they offer 20 stories every day. And one of the stories in today's msn.com, and I'd like all of you, when you go home, to Google msn.com to see what I read today. And it said the 50 poorest towns in each state. And guess who came up in Vermont? Not Rockingham, Bellows Falls. And it cited some statistics and poverty rates and things like that. I think part of that is because our high taxes have driven people away. But now on the flip side, there's so much we could do. We could do a great deal to make this town the great town that it was 100 years ago. We have a beautiful town, but we all have to kick in. And the most important people for getting that going are right here in this room, all of us. And if we...
So Ron, I'm just going to try to draw you back. We're talking about the amendment.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
the $243,000 cut that has been proposed.
I'm sorry.
So I'd like to just draw you back to speak more on that, please.
As far as the amendment, I really don't know what to say because I greatly agree with a lot of what this gentleman has said. I think that amount of money is drastic, but There's fat everywhere that could be trimmed. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Actually, Jim, at the beginning of the meeting, I talked about two times around on an issue, so I think we've given you that. Any other questions, comments? Deb?
I would really like us to be aware that if Bellows Falls is the poorest town or village in the state of Vermont, the reality is that we're not just impacted by village taxes. Whereas all the dissension and request to reduce taxes in Rockingham, the town tax by which we all must pay. That we're doing our work here. The reality is this budget's down. We've done significant work in the last budget year to make things happen, and the changes that you've seen and the safety that we still provide. And again, in whittling down this budget, remember that any reduction in this budget will not just affect the police department. We will whittle everything if we are required to do so by the vote of the taxpayers. It will impact every piece of your security and safety in the village and our ability to operate it. So while I am a strong advocate of reducing, I also see that our school budgets and our town budgets are having, these days, a bigger impact on the village residents here who pay their taxes than the village tax. So I would have to say I am not an advocate of this reduction at this time. As Mr. Andrews has already stated, there are plenty of meetings for people to come to, plenty of budget meetings for people to come to, no one attends, to ask us to do these reductions when we are making our budget. We had a lot of thought put into where we are now, with what we have left after this current year, tax year's reduction. So please understand that we know what the impact is on our community if we reduce the safety piece, and the trustees may not reduce the budget for the police department as much as other areas, which will have a different kind of impact.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one comment.
Mr. Kern, this is your second.
I forgot to mention, this is like very current. On the 6 o'clock WCAX news, Governor Scott announced that the legislature that wanted to raise the school and town taxes, I think 6 cents apiece, he was going to veto. And the legislature is not willing to fight him about that because it would cause a whole lot of trouble. So I think that's good news to hear.
Mr. Hardy.
I'd just like to ask the trustees and Ron to get together, and if there's, what was that figure, Ron, 3,600 calls you went to, or incidences?
Yes.
Then I think other towns, if they respond more than X amount of times to a property or a place, they can charge for those calls, for that service for the police to go there. And I would just ask the trustees and the fire and the police department to get together and see where all those instances are. There must be a cluster of them to certain places, and then maybe put in a policy to charge those people that are using the service, just like we do water and sewer and everything else. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Bergman.
I would just like to go back to the installation of the fire, whatever they are, the water.
Sprinkler systems.
Sprinkler systems. You said that they were paid for out of the water users' fees. Is that correct?
Out of the water fund.
Is that the user fees?
The user fees support the water fund.
Is that an actual allowed thing to do? It seems to me that looking back, thinking back on times before, they were not allowed to be used on anything but the water treatment plant.
what it is it's a connection to the main lines, and the work that was done, it was a connection from the main itself to the building itself. And in the past, normally that would be done by an individual property owner, but as trying to make these buildings safer, and from a fire protection standpoint, is a great advantage to that. The Board of Trustees felt it was in the best interest of the community to do that work.
So you're saying that it's part of improving the water treatment plant?
It's not just the plant, but it's the lines that come from the plant to people's homes. It's the distribution system that it's part of. The fees do support the distribution system and the plant itself.
All set?
Well, Jiggs has something to say.
Yes, the manager's already mentioned the concept of this, the density here in the square, and when we have building owners that are willing to make that commitment and fund a substantial part of the sprinkling of these buildings, we thought it was first a good idea to encourage that. We wanted to encourage it too before we repaved the square, because we'd rather not have to dig it back up too soon after that. But more importantly, there are fees attached to sprinkler users in addition to the water fees. And actually, there is a payback period. I don't know what that is exactly right at this moment, but there really is a payback period for the contribution that we made, the water department made for those improvements.
No, I don't have any argument with people having a sprinkler system, or even with the help. I was remembering that the user fee money had to stay with the plant. And thank you for your explanation.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Moderator, I would like to request that when we vote on this amendment, that we do so with a paper ballot.
Are there 6 other people that want to vote on the amendment by paper ballot? If so, please rise. Only appears that we have 2, so that will be a voice vote. Any other questions or comments? We're on Article 4. And the amendment would read, shall the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate money to pay the indebtedness of the village and pay all other general and regular expenses of the village beginning July 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2019 in the amount of $1,431,220 in expenditures, of which $1,386,950 will be raised by taxes. That reflects off the main motion the cut of $243,000. Are we ready for the question? All those in favor of this motion would say aye. Aye. All those opposed would say no. No. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it, and the amendment is defeated. Going back to the main motion, and the dollar figures for the main motion are $1,674,220 in expenditures, of which raised by taxes will be $1,629,950. Is there any more discussion on the main motion? And we've had a request that the main motion would be voted on by paper ballot. So if we could, hearing no other discussion, if we could have the justices of peace come down to check people in. You'll need your green card as you come down. You'll receive your ballot, and the JPs will help walk you through it. Polls are now officially closed. The JPs will count this before we move on to the next article. So I'd like to read the results. Voting yes on Article 4, 43. Voting no, 16. And we had one despoiled ballot. So the article passes. We will now move on to Article 5. Shall the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate the sum of $75,000 to replenish the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund, this amount to be raised by taxes? Jim.
Okay. I move that the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate the sum of $75,000 to replenish the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund, this amount to be raised by taxes.
Is there a second? Second. We have a motion that has been made and seconded. The motion reading that the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate the sum of $75,000 to replenish the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund, this amount to be raised by taxes. Is there any discussion? Okay. Mr. McCall.
Yes. Let me give you a little background. The Bellows Falls Village Corporation ended fiscal year 2017, that would be June 30th, 2017, with a fund balance of $80,000. Our accountants, our public accountants that do our books, have recommended to both the village and the town that their fund balance should be something around 16% of your operating budget. The town currently meets, in fact, they exceed that. The village, that number would be between $250,000 and $260,000. As I said, our fund balance at the beginning of this fiscal year was $80,000. So we're, in the eyes of our outside accountants, we are approximately $170,000 short. Oh, that's the unrestricted. Yeah. Oh. We're approximately $170,000 short of what they advise us to have. Now, as of right now, they haven't taken action to diminish our financial reports, but that certainly will happen. Now, so how do we get into this situation? Well, when the trustees were preparing their budget 2 years ago, they felt that they had excess surplus. So they earmarked $58,000 of that surplus to be used to fund the operating budget of the village. Now, when we closed the books at the end of 2017, the deficit was $163,000, not $58,000. The extra $110,000 of deficit resulted from a number of items, the most significant of which are the the decision to replace the town manager and the severance payment that was required, and obviously we had to hire immediately a new manager. That was a major part of that difference, that $110,000 difference. The other was that the town of Rockingham settled a tax dispute with TransCanada. This was to deal with tax years 2012, 13, and 14. The village's portion of that settlement was $76,000, and that hit in full, that hit the financial statements for fiscal 2017. So as I said, what turned out to be a gesture to help taxpayers because of the events that occurred during fiscal 2017, we became woefully short of the surplus or the fund balance that we should have. Now, this motion would raise and appropriate $75,000. Now that, I mentioned we're about $170,000 short of the target. But our feeling was that we should try to build up that surplus over a few years, not try to do it all at once. And so I guess the good news is the budget that we just passed was down $71,000. The bad news is that we want you to kick in $75,000 to help this our fund balance issue. And it really is a legitimate issue. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions or comments? Doug?
What does that do to the tax rate? The additional 75,000?
It would basically put it right back to the
What it was last
to what
year?
it was this year.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Jim Mitchell. Coming down to you, Jim.
I have a problem with the fact that the town gets the lion's share of our taxes, okay? When the dam is in this village, they're flush with cash. We're not. If you bother to read the email, as Mr. Kern said, that I sent to the town manager today, MSN, their major news story was the 50 poorest towns in the United States of America. And guess who was on the very top? Bellows Falls Village.
All right, so Jim, I want to bring us back to the 75,000, please.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Matt Treber.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Matt Treber. I'm just wondering, Jim, if you could tell me if that's typical for a municipality to have that 16% reserve. That seems like a wonderful reserve to have, but almost a pie in the sky amount. I know the state of Vermont doesn't have anywhere near that much as a percentage of reserve. So I'm just wondering how realistic a number that is.
I think that's a good question. I really don't have a good answer for you, Matt, because this is a number that the auditors have come up with. Presumably, it is reflective of cities and towns that they audit. As I said, the town, I believe, exceeds it. I'm not sure. Does it exceed it exceeds it?
Yes, and in fact, the town decided this year to set aside funds in capital reserve funds for this building, Rockingham Meeting House, as well as for paving projects.
So, my feeling is, personally, that's a lot of fund balance to have, quite frankly. But I think 80,000 is not enough. I know that. And whether we actually make it to 260, we'll have to see. But I think this will get us up to hopefully around the $150,000, $160,000 level. And I think that's a real good start. And I think it'll demonstrate to the auditors that we're taking this issue seriously. I think we should ask the auditor for more details on how how many towns and villages actually hit that number.
Mr. Moderator, may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I'm just wondering, do we, you mentioned that the auditors have not found against us yet. Are we anticipating a negative finding or a decreased bond rating or increased bond payments in the event that that number isn't increased?
I would think that we would get a material finding. I don't think, we don't have a rating. When we issue bonds, it's done through the bond bank. And so there is no specific rating, I don't believe, for either Rockingham or Bellows Falls.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. McAuliffe.
Has there been any penalty in the last few years by the auditor?
This only developed in June 30th, 2017. So it's...
I thought we had talked about this before when I was village president also.
No, you had, I didn't want to bring you up on this. I was trying to protect...
But I remembered the guidance I received, and so I'm questioning, and why did you, what propelled the $75,000 number? Could it be less? Could you try and do your increase in smaller increments?
Well, I think that that's what we tried to do. We said we're at
75 is not real small, though.
I'm not going to debate this issue with this.
Any other questions or comments?
If I may, Mr. Moderator.
Mark.
Just to point out, we did try doing a smaller increment last year, and it was denied, and the fund balances continued to not grow. So, I mean, we need to do something, and if we don't do anything, if this motion does not pass this year, we're going to get into more dangerous territory, but questions will come from the auditors.
The other issue that I should have mentioned is that, this year we had the $240,000 reduction in the taxes. So right now at 10 months, it would appear that we're going to come in for fiscal 2018 with a small deficit. So that 80,000 will go down by some amount. So again, it's not a good picture. I think 75 is a reasonable number, and I think we can hope in fiscal 19 that we'll actually end up with a budget surplus. But I think coming in closer to 150,000 on a 1.629 budget, which is about 8%, I think is very prudent.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Paul.
Shane.
I just wanted to mention, Jim, that the unassigned reserve balance for FY 17 was $64,092, not $80,000.
I just count them all.
Stefan, do you have a comment?
Where's the motion?
We've had some substantial sales here recently through an auction service, and there may be an option to whether it's a compromise here, if there was to be an amendment, where we've taken in approximately, somewhere around $30,000 so far, approximately. And then we've got some other stuff that we had for sale here that hasn't added in yet. And,
does that go into our...
No, but that would go into the general fund, but those are funds that I think we could reassign to put towards this fund balance reserve, and thus not have to increase the tax rate by almost 3 cents to make the goal that you're talking about. I agree, it's something that we ought to have, but...
I thought we had an agreement on this.
Well, to be fair, it's just a thought.
Yeah.
It's an option.
Any other questions or comments? Jim, coming around.
James Mitchell, we're talking about our fund balance. It's the 15th of the month, my wallet is bare, and I'm sure there are a lot of others in this town, their wallets are empty. and we're surviving. We can find other ways to replenish that fund balance, not on the backs of the taxpayers.
Any other questions or comments? Does everyone have the motion in mind? I will repeat the motion. Motion has been made and seconded that the voters of the Bellows Falls Village Corporation raise and appropriate the sum of $75,000 to replenish the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund, this amount to be raised by taxes. If we're all ready for the question, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed would say no. The ayes appear to have it. Then we'll go to the division of the House. So have your green card in your hand, please. All those in favor would stand and hold their green card. And the JPs will come down. So you're going to get the number, Denny.
She voted for it.
Are we set, guys? All right, you can sit down. All those opposed would please stand and show your card.
Oh, Christ. No.
If they don't have a green card, Pat, in their hand, they're not voting.
Well, go up there and count.
That's correct, yes. Make sure you stand, please. Stay standing if you're against this motion. Everyone can sit down now. Yes, 1-7. Yeah. The results of your vote on Article 5, 37 yeses, 17 noes. The motion passes. We will now move on to Article 6, to transact any other business deemed proper when not involving the expenditure of village funds or any other business acted upon in the preceding articles. Does anyone have anything? Mr. McPhee.
I do if Mr. Trieber is still here, is he? I have a question which involves the village. I know there was a bill in committee that I'm not sure it made it to the legislature that would require towns of a certain population to have a police department. I'm wondering how that is proceeding, because I, for one, would love to see that pass. Therefore, the village of Bellows Falls would no longer need a police department. The town of Rockingham would, and we could cease to exist as an entity other than water and sewer.
Mr. Trieber, if you'd like to respond to that.
Sure, I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, I missed where it was towards me, so I wasn't following for a little while. But that bill has been introduced several times in both the House and Senate, and every session it has died on the wall, including this one.
Can you support that bill if it comes up again?
I was, so that's fine. I did, not this session, the previous session, had been asked to introduce that bill and did introduce it.
Thank you.
Is there any other business? Anything at all?
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much.